The alarm started ringing on a normal Tuesday morning. Jake Sullivan was drinking his coffee in the military command center when the computers started flashing red warnings. Something big was coming toward Earth from space. Jake put down his coffee cup and walked to the main screen. He was the commander of the defense team, and he had never seen anything like this before. There were 300 alien ships heading straight for Earth. They were huge, much bigger than any human spaceship. A young officer named Amy Rodriguez called out from her station. Her voice was shaking a little bit. She said they were getting a message from the alien ships. Jake told her to play it for everyone to hear. The voice that came through the speakers was cold and strange. It did not sound human at all. The computer changed the alien words into English so they could understand. The voice said they were called the Krethian Empire. They said Earth now belonged to them. Humans had one day to give up, or the aliens would take Earth by force. The voice said they had defeated 700 other worlds. Earth would be number 701. Then the message stopped. The room became very quiet. Nobody knew what to say. Jake looked around at his team. They all looked scared, but they were waiting for him to tell them what to do. Jake asked the science officer, Lisa Chang, what she thought about the alien ships. Lisa pulled up information on her computer. She told Jake that each alien ship was as big as a small city. They had powerful weapons that could shoot energy beams. Their defensive shields were better than anything humans had ever built. Lisa said the aliens were much more advanced than humans. Jake asked the question he did not want to ask. He wanted to know what chance humans had if they tried to fight. Lisa looked sad when she answered. She said humans had less than 3% chance of winning a regular battle. Jake nodded slowly. He had expected that answer. Humans had been exploring space for more than 100 years, but they had never met aliens who wanted to hurt them. Now everything had changed in just one morning. Jake told Amy to call the president right away. He also told her to start something called Protocol Omega. When Amy heard those words, she looked up quickly. Protocol Omega was a special emergency plan. She asked Jake if he was really sure about using it. Jake looked at her seriously. Protocol Omega was the last option humans had. It was not about guns or missiles or spaceships. It was about using psychology and making the enemy confused. Human soldiers and thinkers had been studying war for thousands of years. They had learned many tricks about how to mess with enemy minds. These tricks had never been used against aliens before. Jake explained his thinking. He said humans could not beat the aliens with normal weapons. But humans had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They had learned things about fighting that maybe these aliens did not know. Maybe humans could use their minds instead of their guns. A few hours later, the president gave permission to use Protocol Omega. Military forces all around the world started getting ready. Their plan had nothing to do with shooting weapons. Instead, they were going to use confusion, fear, kindness, and every strange human behavior they could think of. They were going to fight in a way the aliens had never seen before. The alien ships reached Earth almost exactly one day later. The alien commander was named Zethkor. He looked at his computer screens and felt satisfied. The humans had not shot any missiles at them. They had not put up any defensive satellites. They had done nothing to defend themselves. One of Zethkor's officers said it looked like the humans had given up without fighting. The officer said humans must be even weaker than they thought. Zethkor agreed. This would be the easiest conquest in their long history. Zethkor started giving orders to land soldiers on Earth. He told his troops to go to all the big cities. He thought the conquest would be finished very quickly. But then something strange happened. Every communication device on the alien ship suddenly turned on at the same time. Thousands of messages started playing all at once. There was music, screaming, laughing, talking, animal sounds, and videos of humans doing very private things. All of it was playing at the same time on every channel. Zethkor demanded to know what was happening. His communication officer looked confused and stressed. He said the humans were sending broadcasts on every frequency at the same time. Their systems could not filter it out or stop it. It was all just random noise and strange cultural information. Zethkor was annoyed but not worried. He thought this was just a stupid attempt to fight back. He told his communications officer to ignore all the human broadcasts. They would continue with the invasion as planned, but this was just the beginning. The humans had a lot more planned. Zethkor had no idea what was coming next. The Krethian Empire had conquered 700 worlds by being stronger and having better weapons. They had never fought an enemy like humans before. They had never fought an enemy that used confusion and chaos as weapons. They had never fought an enemy that refused to follow the normal rules of war. As the alien landing ship started heading down toward Earth, Jake Sullivan watched from the command center. He knew the aliens thought they had already won. They thought humans were weak and scared. But Jake knew something the aliens did not know. Humans had been surviving and fighting for their entire history. They had learned to be creative, unpredictable, and stubborn. They had learned that sometimes the best way to win a fight was to not fight the way your enemy expected. Jake smiled a little bit as he watched the alien ships landing. The Crethians were about to learn something important. They were about to learn that conquering Earth would be very different from conquering their other 700 worlds. They were about to learn what it meant to fight against humans who refused to give up, and who would use every trick, every strange idea, and every bit of their crazy human nature to protect their home. The invasion had started. But so had humanity's defense, and nothing would go the way the aliens expected. The alien landing ships came down through the sky in perfect lines. They were heading to all the big cities around the world. Zethkor had told his soldiers to ignore the strange messages from the humans. He thought humans were just scared and trying weak tricks to fight back. He was about to learn his first lesson about humans. Ryan Foster was a captain in the Human Defense Forces. He was in charge of defending New York City. He stood on a building rooftop and watched through his binoculars as the alien ships landed in Central Park. The ships were beautiful in a scary way. They were shiny and silver and looked very advanced. The doors on the ships opened. Alien soldiers started walking out. Ryan saw that they were very tall, almost 7 feet. They had hard shells on the outside of their bodies that looked like armor. They moved like well-trained soldiers, very organized and careful. They set up a security area and started checking the surroundings with their scanning equipment. Ryan spoke into his radio. He said just 2 words: "Execute Phase 2." Then he waited to see what would happen. What happened next would be talked about for many years to come. From every direction around the park, humans started coming out. But they were not soldiers with weapons. They were regular people wearing regular clothes. And they were not acting scared or angry. They were acting like they were having a party. Music started playing from big speakers that people had brought. People started dancing. Someone had brought a grill and started cooking food. Children were running around playing with colorful balloons. A man dressed in a silly hot dog costume was giving away free food samples. Someone threw a frisbee and it flew past a confused alien soldier. The alien soldiers stopped moving. They pointed their weapons at different people, but nobody was attacking them. These were just normal people having fun. The aliens did not know what to do. This had never happened before in any of their invasions. Zethkor's voice came through on the alien soldiers' communicators. He asked for a report on what was happening. One soldier answered nervously. He said the humans were not fighting, instead they seemed to be celebrating. The soldier said he was not sure what to do. One human had just tried to give him a drink called beer. There was a long silence. Then, Zethkor asked in disbelief if the humans were celebrating during an invasion. The soldier confirmed that yes, that was exactly what was happening. The same thing was happening in cities all over the world. In London, humans had started a cricket game, right where the aliens had landed. In Tokyo, people dressed in costumes had moved their comic convention to the landing zone. In Rio de Janeiro, someone had started a dance line that weaved between the confused alien soldiers. Back at the command center, Jake Sullivan watched video feeds from around the world. He looked satisfied with how things were going. Amy Rodriguez reported that Phase 2 was working very well. She said the aliens were extremely confused. Their military training had not prepared them for friendly civilians during an invasion. Lisa Chung explained why this was working. She said the Crethians were like a hive mind. They all thought in very organized and structured ways. They had conquered hundreds of worlds by following exact military rules. They did not know how to handle random, chaotic behavior from civilians who were not scared. Jake added his own thoughts. He said the aliens were used to making people afraid. But they had never met a species that responded to invasion with confusion, jokes, and being friendly. The Crethians simply did not understand this kind of behavior. In Central Park, things were getting more interesting. A group of humans had convinced some alien soldiers to try eating pizza. Another group was trying to teach them how to play baseball. Someone had started a conga line and was trying to get the aliens to join in. The alien squad leader called the main ship again. He sounded desperate. He said he needed instructions because the humans were being friendly. His training had not taught him what to do in this situation. He said one of his soldiers had just accepted an invitation to a barbecue party. Zethkor's frustration was clear even through the translator. He told his soldiers to stand firm and not join in human social activities. He reminded them that they were conquerors, not tourists on vacation, but it was already too late. The damage was done. All around the world, thousands of alien soldiers were in situations their training had never covered. People were offering them food and inviting them to parties. Humans were asking them questions about their home planet and their families. They were being treated like guests instead of invaders. Humans had turned being friendly and welcoming into a weapon. Ryan Foster watched from his position as a group of alien soldiers in Central Park listened to a human tell funny stories. The aliens' body language showed they were stressed and confused. They were actually uncomfortable because people were being too nice to them. Ryan said to his assistant, Pete Morris, that it was interesting to watch. The aliens could handle real combat without being scared, but a friendly party had them completely lost. Pete agreed and explained that the aliens had never learned how to process this kind of situation. They understood real threats and danger, but they had no training for dealing with kindness from an enemy. By the time night came, the invasion had completely stalled. Several alien soldiers had been convinced to pose for photographs with humans. 3 aliens had accepted dinner invitations from families. 1 alien had somehow ended up at a karaoke bar singing songs. The invasion was starting to look less like a military operation and more like a weird cultural exchange program. On his ship, Zethkor read the reports coming in from his ground forces. He could not believe what he was seeing. His well-trained soldiers were being defeated by humans who offered them food and asked them friendly questions. This had never happened in 700 conquests. The Crethean Empire had always won by being stronger and more aggressive than their enemies. They had better weapons and better technology. But now they were facing an enemy that did not fight back in the expected way. Humans were using social behavior and kindness as weapons, and somehow it was working. Zethkor realized he needed to change his strategy. He needed to remind these humans why the Crethean Empire was feared across the galaxy. He needed to make them scared. But he had no idea that humans had already planned for that too. And humanity was just getting started with their strange and unexpected ways of fighting back. 3 days had passed since the aliens landed on Earth. Zethkor walked back and forth on the bridge of his spaceship. He was very frustrated and angry. The invasion had not gone anywhere. Nothing was working the way it should. He looked at his tactical officer and asked a question. His voice was quiet but dangerous. He wanted to know how an entire group of his soldiers had become distracted by small animals. The tactical officer looked uncomfortable as he explained. He said the humans had brought out creatures they called puppies and kittens. The soldiers had found these animals very cute and distracting. Some soldiers had even asked if they could take the animals home with them. Zethkor could not believe what he was hearing. He shouted that they were here to conquer Earth, not to collect pets. But the damage was already done. The humans had found another way to confuse and distract his forces. The situation was getting worse every day. The human resistance had not decreased at all. Instead, it had changed into something much more dangerous. Humans were not fighting with guns or missiles. They were fighting with their culture, their kindness, and their ability to create chaos in unexpected ways. In Denver, a group of alien soldiers had been invited to visit a school. The students had asked them many questions about their technology and their home world. The children had been genuinely interested in learning about alien culture and philosophy. Several soldiers later admitted in private messages that they had never been treated with such respect and curiosity before. It made them think about their role as conquerors. In Paris, a human philosopher had challenged an alien commander to a debate about conquest and civilization. They had talked for 6 hours. By the end, the alien commander was questioning everything he believed about the Crethean Empire's right to conquer other worlds. In Mumbai, Humans had organized a huge music festival. They had invited all the alien soldiers stationed there. Many of the aliens had been moved to tears by Earth's music. Their own culture did not have such diversity in art and expression. Everything in Crithian society was uniform and organized. They had never experienced anything like human creativity before. At the command center, Jake Sullivan watched all of this happening with satisfaction. Lisa Chang reported that Phase 3 was working even better than they had hoped. She explained that the Crethians were experiencing something they were calling existential warfare. By showing the aliens Earth's cultural diversity, art, and complex philosophy, humans were destroying the basic ideas that the Crethian Empire was built on. Amy Rodriguez added more information. She said there were signs of conflict within the alien forces. Several officers had been sending messages to their leaders asking difficult questions. They were asking things like what is the real purpose of conquest and whether conquered civilizations have value beyond just taking their resources. Jake smiled a little. He said the Crethians had conquered 700 worlds by being stronger and following strict military rules. But they had never fought a species that used ideas and culture as weapons instead of guns and bombs. But Phase 3 had another part to it. This next part would be even more effective at breaking down the alien invasion. Ryan Foster was in charge of this operation from his base in New York. He gave the order to begin Phase 3 Part B. He told his team to introduce the aliens to human entertainment and media. What happened next would go down in history as one of the most successful psychological operations ever done. Humans started sharing their movies, television shows, books, and video games with the alien soldiers. At first, the aliens thought these were just primitive cultural objects. They did not think entertainment was important. But then they started actually watching and reading, and everything changed. The aliens watched science fiction movies that showed humans becoming friends with aliens. They watched war movies that showed the emotional damage that fighting causes. They watched dramas that explored complicated moral questions about right and wrong. They watched comedies that showed how humans could find humor even in terrible situations. The Crethians could not stop watching. Their own culture had no entertainment like this. They had no stories that asked difficult questions or showed different points of view. Everything in their society was about duty and conquest. They had never seen fiction that made them think about things from another perspective. One alien soldier in Seattle sent a message to the main ship that became very famous. He said he had just watched something humans called a movie. The story was about a war between two groups where both sides thought they were right. The movie did not clearly say which side was correct. The soldier said this troubled him deeply. He asked if maybe the Crethian conquest had caused suffering. He wondered if they had ever considered the perspectives of the people they defeated. Zethkor read this message with growing fear. This was not just one soldier having doubts. Hundreds of his soldiers were expressing similar concerns and asking similar questions. The humans had infected his forces with something more dangerous than any weapon or disease. They had infected them with doubt and the ability to question authority. More messages kept coming in. Soldiers were asking about the morality of conquest. They were wondering if the civilizations they destroyed had value. They were questioning whether strength gave them the right to dominate others. The entire philosophical foundation of the Crethian Empire was crumbling. Zethkor made a decision. He would fight back. He would remind these humans why the Crethian Empire was feared throughout the galaxy. He would use the fear protocol. This was a special tactic they used to break the spirit of any species that resisted. It involved showing overwhelming force and displaying the consequences of resistance. What Zethkor did not know was that humans had been creating scary entertainment for thousands of years. They had been making each other afraid for fun. Horror movies, scary stories, haunted houses. Humans understood fear in ways the Crethians never could. The aliens were about to learn that humans knew more about fear than they did, and they were about to learn it in the most uncomfortable way possible. The Crethian fear protocol was famous across all the worlds they had conquered. It was a carefully designed show of power, meant to break the fighting spirit of any resistance. They would show holographic videos of past conquests, broadcast images of their most powerful weapons, and demonstrate their advanced technology. This tactic had worked on 700 different civilizations. Zethkor activated the fear protocol in all the major cities at the same time. Giant holographic displays appeared above every city on Earth. The displays showed the destruction of previous civilizations. They showed the power of Krethian weapons. They showed how pointless it was to resist. The humans watched the displays with interest. In Chicago, someone in the crowd asked if that was all the aliens had. The question was not asked in fear. It was asked with curiosity and maybe a little bit of disappointment. At the command center, Jake Sullivan actually laughed when he saw what the aliens were doing. He turned to Lisa Chang and asked what their response would be. Lisa smiled and said it was time to show the aliens what fear really meant to humans. She gave the order to start Phase 4. All around the world, humans began their counter-operation. They started using the same holographic displays that the Krethians were using. But instead of showing military power, humans started broadcasting their own content. Horror movies. Thousands and thousands of horror movies. The Krethians had never developed horror as entertainment. Their culture did not understand creating stories designed to scare people for fun. They were completely unprepared for what they were about to see. Classic scary films from the 20th and 21st centuries started playing. Modern psychological thrillers, movies about ghosts and demons, movies about body horror and cosmic terror. Humans had spent many generations perfecting the art of scaring themselves for entertainment. The Krethian soldiers could not look away. These were not recordings of real events. These were imagined fears. These were terrors that existed only in human minds, but they were shown so realistically that they seemed completely real. An alien lieutenant in Tokyo sent a panicked message to the main ship. He said the humans had shown them something called the Exorcist. It was about a human child possessed by an evil spirit. The lieutenant said he knew it was not real, but his mind could not stop thinking of it as a real threat. He asked why humans would create such content on purpose. Another soldier from London sent a report. He had watched something called Black Mirror. Each episode showed the dark side of technology and society. The soldier said he was disturbed because these humans imagined their own destruction as entertainment. He asked what kind of species does that to themselves. But the psychological attack did not stop there. Humans began sharing their ghost stories and urban legends. They told stories about haunted houses and cursed objects. They organized tours of places they claimed were haunted by spirits. They held late-night meetings around campfires where they told scary stories. The Krethians were completely confused. These humans had been invaded by a superior military force, and their response was to try to scare their invaders with made-up stories. It made no sense. And yet somehow it was working. Ryan Foster watched as a group of alien soldiers in Central Park sat around a campfire, listening to a human tell a classic scary story, called The Hook. The aliens' body readings showed their stress levels were going up. They were actually scared of a simple story told around a fire. Ryan said to Pete Morris that it was fascinating to watch. The aliens could handle real combat without any fear, but a campfire ghost story made them nervous. Pete explained that this was because they had never learned how to process fictional fear. They understood real dangers very well, but imaginary ones confused and scared them. They had no mental defense against that kind of fear. Things got worse when humans introduced the aliens to horror video games and virtual reality experiences. These were interactive stories where the aliens had to make choices and experience scary situations firsthand. Several soldiers had to get medical treatment for what their doctors called severe mental distress after playing a game called Silent Hill. On the spaceship, Zethkor read the psychological reports with growing worry. His soldiers were not just scared. They were starting to question reality itself. The humans had shown them that fear could be created, controlled, and even enjoyed. That terror could be art rather than just a tool for war. This was breaking their understanding of how the universe worked. The chief medical officer came to Zethkor with an urgent recommendation. He said they needed to evacuate all ground forces immediately. The psychological damage was spreading fast through the ranks. Soldiers were reporting nightmares. The Krethians did not even have a word for nightmares until they met humans. Some soldiers were now afraid to go into dark places. Others had developed something humans called anxiety, about situations that were not even real. Zethkor looked at all the data in complete disbelief. In 700 conquests, the Krethian Empire had never seen anything like this. These humans had turned their own imagination into a weapon. They had made fear into entertainment, and now that entertainment was being used to terrorize trained soldiers. But humanity was not finished. They had one more phase planned. Phase 5 was about to begin, and it would be the most powerful attack of all. It would not use fear or confusion. It would use something that the Crethians had never encountered in any of their conquests. It would use hope and human resilience. And it would completely destroy the Crethian will to continue the invasion. The final phase of humanity's defense was not about fear or confusion. It was about something much more powerful and much more human. It was about hope and the ability to keep going no matter what happens. Jake Sullivan stood in front of the main display at the command center. He watched video feeds coming in from all over the world. 2 weeks had passed since the invasion started. The alien occupation force was falling apart from the inside. Amy Rodriguez told Jake that Phase 5 was ready to begin. All the cities were prepared. Jake nodded and said it was time to show the aliens who humans really were. What happened next would become the most important moment in human history. At the same time, in every occupied city, humans began to share their stories. Not scary stories or entertainment, but real stories from their lives. Stories about surviving impossible situations. Stories about human strength and never giving up. Stories about people who had experienced terrible things but found ways to keep living and find happiness again. They shared the story of how humanity survived a terrible plague in the 14th century that killed millions, how they rebuilt their cities after devastating world wars, how they came back from almost destroying themselves with nuclear weapons, how they overcame hatred and division to build a more united world. But more importantly, they shared personal stories. A woman in Tokyo told the alien soldiers about losing her entire family in an earthquake. She described how she found the strength to help other people rebuild their lives. A man in New York talked about surviving cancer and using that experience to become a doctor who helped others. A teacher in Sao Paulo explained how education had helped her community escape poverty. The Crethians listened to these stories, and something inside them changed forever. These humans were not just survivors. They were people who had suffered real pain and real loss, but they had chosen to keep going anyway. They had chosen to be kind anyway. They had chosen to build things instead of destroying things. In Central Park, Ryan Foster watched as an alien soldier named Vecron sat with a group of humans around a campfire. An old woman was telling him about her husband who had died in an accident 50 years ago. The woman spoke softly. She said she had been so angry when it happened. She wanted to give up on life. But she had children to raise. She knew her husband would want her to keep living. So she did. She found happiness again. She found purpose in her life. Now, many years later, she could remember her husband with love instead of just pain. Vecron's translator struggled to convert the emotional complexity of her words. He asked her how she could endure such loss and still choose to be kind to others. He said the Crethians had conquered hundreds of worlds to avoid being vulnerable. They wanted to become so strong that nothing could hurt them. The old woman smiled gently. She said, "You cannot truly be alive if you are never vulnerable. Pain is part of life. The important question is what you do with that pain. Do you let it make you cruel, or do you let it teach you compassion for others?" Similar conversations were happening everywhere. Humans were not giving lectures or trying to teach lessons. They were simply being human, sharing their experiences, their struggles, their victories, and their failures. On the spaceship, Zethkor received a communication that shocked him completely. It was a petition signed by more than 60% of his ground forces. They were requesting to end the invasion. They were not asking to end it because they were defeated, not because they were scared. They wanted to end it because they no longer believed that conquest was right. The petition said that they had met a civilization that showed them a different way to live. These humans had suffered more than the Crethians ever knew was possible. Yet they had chosen cooperation instead of domination. They had chosen diversity instead of uniformity. They had chosen compassion instead of conquest. The petition said the soldiers had learned that real strength is not the absence of weakness. Real strength is choosing to protect weakness rather than exploit it. They could no longer participate in destroying such a civilization. Zethkor stared at the document in complete disbelief. In 700 conquests, nothing like this had ever happened. His soldiers had not been defeated in battle. They had been changed by ideas and compassion. He opened a communication channel to the human command center. Jake Sullivan's face appeared on the screen. Zethkor spoke simply and directly. He said that humans had won, but he did not understand how. The Crethians had brought overwhelming military force. They had followed their proven tactics. They had used fear. Yet they were completely defeated. Jake's expression was surprisingly kind. He explained that the aliens had tried to conquer Earth with the tools of war. Humans defended it with the tools of humanity. The aliens showed their weapons. Humans showed their culture. The aliens tried to create fear. Humans showed them that fear is just one emotion among many, and not even the strongest one. Zethkor asked what was stronger than fear. Jake answered with one word: everything. Then he explained, love is stronger. Hope is stronger. Curiosity, compassion, humor, and creativity are all stronger. The fundamental human belief that tomorrow can be better than today. The belief that understanding is more valuable than domination. The belief that diversity is actually strength, not weakness. Zethkor was silent for a long time. Then he said his forces were compromised. They had been infected with human philosophy. The Empire would not accept them back. He asked what humans would do with them. Jake smiled. He said humans would offer them a choice. They could return to their empire and report their failure, or they could stay on Earth, learn more about humans, and maybe help humans understand the 700 civilizations the Krethians had conquered. There was much they could learn from each other. Zethkor asked in surprise if humans would accept them after they tried to conquer Earth. Jake said, that is what humans do. They fight back when threatened, but they prefer to make friends when possible. Humans had been doing this for thousands of years. It was messier than conquest, more complicated, more unpredictable, but it was also more interesting and more rewarding. 2 days later, the Krethian fleet left Earth's orbit and headed back into space. But they left behind almost 40,000 soldiers who chose to stay. These soldiers wanted to learn and understand this strange species that had defeated them without firing a single shot. Zethkor was one of them who stayed. 6 months had passed since the Krethian fleet left Earth. The planet had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. 40,000 alien soldiers were now living among humans, learning about Earth culture and sharing knowledge about the galaxy. In Central Park, Vecron sat on a bench with the old woman who had first told him about her late husband. They met every week now. She was teaching him about human philosophy and history. He was teaching her about the stars and the many civilizations that existed in the galaxy. Vecron told her that he had been thinking a lot about the invasion. He said he felt shame for what they had tried to do. The old woman patted his hand gently. She told him that recognizing a mistake is the first step toward becoming better. She said humans had made many terrible mistakes in their history too. What mattered was learning from those mistakes. At the command center, Jake Sullivan was having a meeting with Zethkor. The former war leader was now working as a cultural ambassador. He was helping humans understand the Krethian Empire and the 700 worlds they had conquered. Zethkor shared troubling information. He said the Empire was not happy about what happened on Earth. They saw it as a failure and a threat. If humans could defeat a Krethian invasion without violence, other conquered worlds might try to do the same thing. The Empire was considering more aggressive action against Earth. Jake asked if the Empire would really risk another invasion. Zethkor shook his head. He said the Empire was more likely to try isolation. They would tell all their conquered worlds that Earth was dangerous and forbidden. They would try to prevent human ideas from spreading to other planets. Lisa Chang, who was also at the meeting, said that isolation would not work in the long term. Ideas could not be stopped by walls or threats. The Krethian soldiers who stayed on Earth would eventually communicate with their home world. The truth about humans would spread no matter what the Empire tried to do. Jake agreed. He said humanity had proven something important. They had shown that there were ways to resolve conflicts besides violence. They had shown that understanding and compassion could be more powerful than weapons. This was a lesson that would eventually reach other civilizations. In Tokyo, a group of Krethian soldiers was attending a university. They were studying human history, art, and philosophy. One of them, a young soldier named Kresheva, was particularly interested in human music. She had started learning to play the piano. Her teacher said she had natural talent. Kresheva told her teacher that music did not exist in Krethian culture. All their communication was functional and direct. The idea of creating sound patterns just for emotional expression was completely foreign to them. But now that she understood it, she could not imagine life without music. Her teacher smiled and said that was the beautiful thing about cultural exchange. Both sides gained something valuable. Humans were learning about the galaxy and advanced technology from the Krethians. The Crethians were learning about art, emotion, and different ways of thinking from humans. In London, Ryan Foster was training a mixed team of human and Crethian soldiers. They were developing new defensive strategies that combined human creativity with Crethian technology. The team worked well together. The Crethians brought discipline and advanced knowledge. The humans brought flexibility and innovative thinking. Ryan noticed that the Crethian soldiers were changing in subtle ways. They laughed more now. They asked questions instead of just following orders. They had started to develop individual personalities instead of all thinking the same way. This was something that never would have happened in the Empire. Pete Morris mentioned that the psychological reports showed significant changes in the Crethian soldiers. They were developing emotional complexity and individual identity. For a species that had always functioned as a collective hive mind, this was a revolutionary change. Back at the command center, Jake was writing a report to the United Earth Council. He wrote about the long-term implications of the invasion and its peaceful resolution. He explained that humanity had been given a unique opportunity. They had made first contact with a hostile alien civilization and turned enemies into friends without violence. Jake wrote that this achievement proved something important about humanity. When faced with an enemy that was stronger and more advanced, humans did not give up. They did not respond with matching violence. Instead, they used their greatest strengths, their creativity, their cultural diversity, their emotional depth, and their fundamental belief that people could change and grow. He wrote that the Crethians came expecting a war. They got education instead. They came to conquer. They stayed to learn. They came believing that strength meant domination. They learned that real strength meant the courage to be vulnerable and to change your mind when you were wrong. Jake paused in his writing and looked out the window. Below, he could see humans and Crethians walking together through the city. Some were clearly friends. Others were colleagues working on projects together. Children played while alien and human parents watched nearby. It was not a perfect integration. There were still misunderstandings and difficulties. Some humans were afraid of the aliens. Some Crethians still struggled with concepts like individual freedom and emotional expression. But they were all trying. They were all learning. Jake returned to his report. He wrote that the invasion had taught humanity an important lesson too. They had learned that their greatest weapon was not technology or military might. It was their humanity itself, their ability to show compassion to enemies, their willingness to share their culture and learn from others, their capacity to find hope even in the darkest situations. He wrote that the Crethian Empire had conquered 700 worlds through force. But they had never encountered a species like humans. A species that had survived countless wars and disasters, not by becoming harder and crueler, but by learning to be more understanding and cooperative. A species that turned survival into an art form and made resilience part of their cultural identity. Jake concluded his report with a prediction. He wrote that the Crethian Empire would eventually fall, not because of military defeat, but because ideas could not be controlled forever. The soldiers who stayed on Earth would eventually share what they learned with others. Those others would share with more. Slowly but inevitably, the philosophy of conquest and domination would be replaced by something better. He wrote that humanity had done more than just defend Earth. They had planted seeds of change that would grow throughout the galaxy. They had shown that there was an alternative to endless war and conquest. They had proven that strength and compassion were not opposites but partners. In Central Park, Vecron and the old woman finished their weekly meeting. As they said goodbye, Vecron thanked her for her patience in teaching him. The old woman laughed and said she should be thanking him. Learning about the galaxy and other civilizations had given her life new purpose and excitement. Vecron asked her if she had ever imagined that first contact with aliens would happen this way. She thought about it for a moment and then smiled. She said humans had imagined many different scenarios for meeting aliens. Some involved war, some involved peaceful cooperation. But probably nobody had imagined it would involve pizza parties, horror movies, and therapy sessions. They both laughed. Vecron said that was very human. To take something terrifying like an alien invasion and somehow turn it into an opportunity for connection and growth. The old woman said that was what humans did best. They survived. They adapted. And they never stopped hoping that tomorrow could be better than today. As the sun set over New York City, casting long shadows across the park, Humans and Crethians continued their daily lives together. They worked, learned, argued, laughed, and built a new kind of society. One that proved peace was possible even between the most different of species. One that showed understanding could bridge any gap. One that demonstrated the simple truth that had saved Earth from conquest. The truth was this: aliens came for war. Humans sent them back with trauma, but not the trauma of violence and defeat. The trauma of having their entire worldview challenged and changed. The trauma of learning that everything they believed about strength and power was incomplete. The trauma of discovering that the species they came to conquer had something far more powerful than weapons. They had humanity. And that made all the difference.